I asked you at the beginning, actually, how to implement the secure communication theme. Actually, in the context of the communication theme here as secure communication, um, which is the fourth theme we saw in the themes we tackled upon the SQL Server environment. These scenarios, literally speaking, we are going to implement transactions and we are going to do a secure coding in order to implement a secure communication. The theme here, via which we see a secure communication, is by designing or implementing a secure environment. How? Just writing secure code. Secure code, why? Because the ways and the methodologies how developers may follow in order to implement a function, they are numerous. It's not unified. To implement a function that displays a list of users, it's not one unique methodology that can be actually followed and that has to be followed. No, there are varieties. And since there are varieties, we have to follow the most secure implementation. Thus, we talk about secure communication. So the secure coding is one of the keys to enhance the secure communication team. The next unit and the next topic we are going, and the last one actually we're going to cover in this database security is the use of the SQL Server, let's say, outcomes amongst an external environment, amongst an external framework, via which we see the SQL Server attributes, variables, variants, objects, whatever, as an element that has a relationship with the SQL Server, but in an external environment. The external environment here, we mean that we are going to use a service that relates the SQL Server components with the external environment. This service is built using technology. The technology we are defining in this unit is the XML. XML, Extensible Markup Language. It's a tag-based programming language that actually can be utilized for a web solution or solution implementation, or any other, let's say, sort of software that needs an architectural structured modeling. Architectural structure in the sense of it has to use a list of architectured and structured list of nodes to design and designate whatever the requirements are, a matter of solving an issue, digital issue. So the first question actually to raise here, actually, why would we, why would any developer needs to store and work with the XML in databases? The XML, as per the definition, we said that it is a matter of, and we know that this is not new for us. It's a matter of a tag-based programming language. Tag-based programming language is an HTML-like. So why developers do need to store and work with XML from within a database, and specifically we talk about from within a SQL Server. Actually, as per the first definition, first of all, actually, we have to recognize that the XML is not accepted to be utilized as a data to be manipulated from within a database. First view, first consideration. So data to be manipulated from within a SQL Server as the XML is not advised. Why? Because it is still the XML in the database. They are actually viewed strictly as a transfer mechanism, not a storage mechanism. The XML, they are not to be used as a data to be stored inside the database, because it is a transfer mechanism. We said earlier that the XML can be utilized as a service to help data be communicated over the digital environment, over the network, to help data to be communicated. So it's a transfer mechanism. It's not a storage mechanism. The XML is a transfer mechanism. It's not a storage mechanism. It is clear, and it has to be actually noticed by you. Mechanism, not a storage mechanism. Yes. Absolutely true. What we are just defining here. So, yet actually, can we store? Actually, first of all, we have to know we are just defining some restrictions and some definitions how to use and so on. But you have to know that XML is a media. At the end of the day, we can store it wherever we want. Yet, as per the use of the XML, it's not to be utilized for storing data. It's not for storage. It is for transferring, transmitting, passing, and so on. On the extreme other end of the, let's say, the spectrum or any other, actually at the extreme need, the XML proponents view the world as just a bunch of XML files and use XML technologies such as the styling sheets for the XML or the XQuery, or the XPath to pass SQL queries. XPath to specify data stores or data sources to store and manipulate their data with little interest in relational technologies. Not only relational technologies, but also with the TSQL technologies. So we have to recognize that the XML actually it is a technology that actually can be utilized with the relational technologies. Here the database, the RDBMSs, and the transact SQL, the TSQL also. So the relational technologies means relational databases can be used, yes, with. So that's here actually we have a clear view of what is the XML and how to use it and where to use it. Now we clearly recognize what is the XML in relationship with the databases, in relationship with the SQL Server specifically. And in this level only, we'll talk about the XML data types. Actually, in its native format, the XML actually it can be utilized to create data within the. It can help developers to query the data from within an XML file. Means the developers can generate a scenario via which they query data from within an XML file. Yes, what does it mean? Can they query when we say that they interrogate or they query data from within an XML file? Can they launch a search using lexically and standardized queries? Yes, absolutely true. They can pass a specific query to search data from within an XML resource. When we say query, it's not to make a Control F using the keyboard, the shortcut. No, it is to be launched from the system itself, from within the system to the system itself. So we talk about queries to pass. Developers actually can use the XML as any of the supported variables of supported, let's say, variations. The XML can be utilized as a variable. The XML can be used as a stored procedure. The XML can be used actually user-defined function or user-defined procedure, something like that. Can be utilized as an element from an object. As per an example, we talk about the fields in the table or in something like that. So developers can use this XML as any of those formats, types, models, something like that. As per the definition of what is a variable is a user-defined placeholder in the memory. When we talk about a variable, still we talk about the native definition of what can be a variable. When we say, for example, in any programming language like C++, when we say int a, what does it mean? We are declaring, means here the program is declaring the a as a variable to hold a value of int. So it is allocating a space in the memory from that has the size of an int. So the same way here, the variables, they actually have the same specificities, user-defined name, maybe, yeah, and they have to have a data type, absolutely. Thus, they have to allocate space in memory, no more, no less, variable. So XML can be treated as a variable. Yes, can be. Developers, when they create or implement a solution, they can treat the XML as a variable. Yeah, absolutely, can. The developers still can use the XML as a parameterized. We can say actually parameterized entry in general. Entry can be stored procedure. What does mean parameterized? Means actually this is an entry that needs to have a specific value or switch to act with a parameter, means parameterized. Yes, the XML can acquire an input to act to give you an output. Other than that, will not work. For example, here, so at the end of the day, the developers can use the XML as a parameterized stored procedure or any input point stored procedure or user-defined function. PDF. Developers can use the XML still to store or to display or to structure the outcome of a function. The outcome of a function, not a procedure. The procedure does not have any outcome, does not have any return. But function, yes. The same way, the XML sensitivities present a structured architecture, structured view of, let's say, data. So the XML can be utilized by the developers to treat portions of objects. Here, the example of the column in a table is a portion of an object. The table is an object. The portion is the field or the column. Yes, the XML can define a field in an entity inside a database. Absolutely. The field, for example, ID, or the field, for example, date, or the field, for example, subject, can be defined using an XML entry, an XML node. There are some limitations actually of the XML data type to be aware of, but everybody has actually, all the database security experts, they have to be actually aware of. Although this actually data type can contain and be checked for null values, unlike other native types, developers can actually cannot directly compare an instance of an XML data type to another instance of an XML data type. However, they convert an instance to a text, or they can actually do any comparison before they do any usage. Otherwise, they will not be able to do so. So in some cases, despite the data type, they have to do some conversions, a sort of a conversion from a data type to another in order to succeed doing the comparison. Any such equality when comparison or making the comparison, it requires a casting. Let me conclude. Let me just give a summary here to you. When we say that the XML is to be utilized by the developers in different source, there are limitations. The limitations here, what if the XML is holding a null value? This is one of the issues. This is one of the concerns. The null value. Not only that, not only that. Comparison of values from whether an XML actually source has to be comparison of values from whether an XML, let's say resource or source, has to be casted into a specific data type. But some of the XML instances, they cannot be compared. They cannot. Developers cannot directly compare an instance of an XML data type to another instance of an XML also data type. But however, they can convert the instance. They can convert the instance to a text data type in order to be able to be compared. That have to be actually converted, and this conversion is made up based on the casting process. So here we define that the null value can be passed into an XML file. We define that not only the null can be passed to an XML file, a null can be actually viewed from whether an XML let's say file. Yes. Not only that, the comparison of values from whether an XML file can be done, yes, but not directly. Developers in so many cases, they have to convert an XML value into a text, simple text, in order to be able to compare it with another XML data type, This conversion is made up, actually, is standard on top of the casting. So once we talk about the instance of an XML is going to be converted into another data type. So we talk about the casting here. We are doing the casting simply. Yeah, casting here means to change from a data type to another. So null values can be passed to an XML and can be stored in an XML and can be read from an XML resource. Comparison of variables in between XML data types can happen. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. But those comparisons, they can be actually done in so many cases where developers, not directly, cannot be done directly. What does mean cannot be directly? It means we cannot compare XML file 1 with the XML file 2. No. Or XML node file 1, node 1 with XML file 1, node 2. No. Cannot be done directly like such. But there have to be actually a comparison of similar data types. There have to be a comparison of similar data types. Remember this. This context of comparison of similar data types, it has to be done after a conversion of the native data type the XML is presenting into a simple text. Textual representation here. We have to talk about string as a data type. Thus, to talk about such a conversion, so we set a casting here, technically speaking. So it's not a matter to write it handy. No, the program has to do so. So the program has to handle the casting, the process of casting. Any questions at this level, please?
No.
Okay, great. Just I'll show you one example via which we see the work with an XML as a variable. Means actually we're going to declare first XML variable. Let me duplicate the slide first of all, just to put it for you. just demonstrate it to you only. Yeah. So here we are declaring actually as an XML program, an XML file, an XML resource. At the end of the day, we need this variable to be utilized. So this is a simple SQL query. Select at. We have a variable we are selecting. We have a variable we are selecting. Let me maximize. Okay, yes, select at XML data. What is this XML data? What is it? Actually, it's a variable defined to have an XML resource. It's a variable. We know since the chapter number 2, to declare a variable, we just give the name, which is user defined. You type whatever you want without space, and you precede it with an at. Here it is at the beginning. Declare at XML data. Here it is. This XML data would have a data type as what? This XML, the full XML. Here it is, XML equal, all in between single quotation, an XML block. This is a node called orders. Inside the orders, there is a second node, a sub node, which is order. Inside the order, first node, order ID. Second sub node, customer ID. Third sub node, order date. Fourth and last sub node, order amount. Every node has a start and start and start and start termination, start termination, start termination. Simple. From where we got these orders? Order ID, customer ID. Is it technical? Do we have to memorize it? No, completely no. Can we change this name? Absolutely. But you have to remember, it's a simple XML. It's a simple XML. You have to know how the XML is working, because we are not here to study the XML, but we have to know how to use the XML. Just for your purpose only, for your refresh your mind how to use this XML only, how to define the XML body only. Every tag is user defined. But it has written for the beginning and it has to be written for the end. Simply user defined. It is user defined, no more, no less. So for this example, we are having 4 fields. Field number 1, order ID. Field number 2, customer ID. Field number 3, order date. Field number 4, order amount. The values are 5, 60, the date here, 2008, 25.90. Those are the values. When we say select at XML, so the program will select what this variable holds, which is the full XML body. So here the XML content will be assigned as if we are just passing an entity to the query. Select at XML data, as if we are passing an entity to the XML query. Here, remember that actually we are manipulating the SQL query. Select at XML data. Simple query, but we have to know what is the source here, the XML data. The program will recognize if there is any issue in this XML design here, it will be shown here. It will be seen. It will be demonstrated at the output here. But if the XML body is clearly and completely correct, so there will be no issue when executing this select query. Just to give you the chance to ask any questions before I give you the second example. Any questions, please? Any requests?
No, Mr.
That's great. So 2 more topics we are going to cover, and we're just going to give you a briefing about that. We are going to cover the last 2 topics in this full course, which are the use of the XML as a full entity inside the database, and the use of the DML, the XML as DML. The last two topics we are going to cover next class, inshallah. The working with the XML as tables. What does it mean? It means we are going to use the XML like the example we see here. This example in front of us now, this XML, this file here. We're going to use it as, we're going to define an entity. Like this one can be an entity named orders, yes. But we're going to clearly define it as an entity and use it as a data store. Table means, as per an example, entity. The last topic we are going to talk about is the use of the XML as data manipulation language, as a DML. XML DML. I have more time actually, but even though, let me just have a look at the question I asked you at the beginning. Let me just stop the recording here.